Well, I did have a question, and I wonder what you guys think of, because the whole uh, there's the denialism of sort of very specific types of social behavior that you usually associate with like sectarian cults now operate on the internet, like purges and defamation.
Mhm.
Um, like things that normal people usually only ever experienced if they were like in a sectarian cult or a religious cult. Now normal people get this like online on the internet all the time. And it seems completely obvious, but there are a lot of people who love to write the cancel culture doesn't exist. There's no such thing as the vampire's castle. Um, they're like denialists, which is very strange to me because these are the same people who would never say, like if I said I'm experiencing racist abuse or I'm experiencing sexism, they would be like, "That's terrible. That's awful." But if I'm like, I'm experiencing something outside of like a specific type of an abuse that exists outside of a specific type of identity-based bigotry, and I'm experiencing a strange kind of bullying, and people are trying to get me fired, and they're emailing and tweeting at my boss, and they're lying about me, and they're saying terrible things about me, and they would be like, "That's not real. That's not real. Cancel culture isn't real. It's not real." And it reminds me of the scene in Mean Girls when they have the assembly where they're talking about what Joe Freeman calls trashing. All the girls were just trashing each other, and they're like, "Look, the bullying has got out of hand." And the biggest bully in school like raises her hand and says, "I just want to say that this school doesn't have a clique problem." So it's just like this thing where there is a number of people really invested in the idea of like obfuscating uh, really cruel, vicious behavior and antisocial behavior and frankly really dangerous behavior that undermines things like employment rights, and I'm going to tweet until someone gets fired. Um, those things are so anathema, I think, to kindness or solidarity, or just like having friends and feeling secure enough around people that you can form connections. But the kind of media class denialism, I think some of them are true believers. Some of them are like, first rule of cancel culture is you do not talk about cancel culture. And I don't know how to talk about this because I used to have an advice column, and like half the shit I would get would be like, everyone's being mean to me and I don't know what to do. And if I say that they're being mean to me, they keep telling me like, "No, well, what did you do?" Um, I don't know how to break with something like that. Like or how to help anyone with something like that. Like I'm uncancelable. I've been, no, first of all, everyone loves me because I've never done anything wrong, so it's not a problem for me. But people live in sort of constant terror of their so-called comrades. I mean, there's a bunch of Stepford wife kind of, there's a lot of like Stockholm syndrome to it too. And it's, the internet is a home for it in a way that normal life isn't. You have to be, because you form kind of a sect on the internet. It's very divisive. I don't know what in God's name to do about something like that.
Well, I feel like I've noticed that kind of denialism in people who, encourage everyone to see social media more instrumentally and less personally. Like people who are like, don't like take it too personally, right? Sort of like use it for your own ends, but don't invest yourself too much in it. And it's almost like they want you to take more of like a depersonalized workplace attitude towards social media. Just like, don't invest yourself too much in it. It's not actually an expression of your personality or anything. And I always find, I don't know, they're like effortlessly wield social media and log off and like forget it all, right? But I think that that position can sometimes like elide the ways in which like we're kind of formed by the situations that we're in and the structures that we take part in. And it's difficult not to invest yourself in being online if you are. It's difficult to take that sort of like casual, distanced, instrumental, sort of professional almost approach
Particularly
to
if it's
social
all you
media.
have. If it's all you have. I mean, the people I know
Yeah.
who have active political lives, you know, families, like, you know, friends, like real friends, they might go on Twitter every once in a while to be like, oh yeah, I'm only on basketball Twitter, which is like, you know, they just talk about sports or something, and they have just a completely different relation to it because they have because they have a real life. I think if you don't have a real life, and even sometimes if you do, it's completely impossible to just log off and disappear.
Yeah,
uh,
yeah,
and brush it off. Like you can't, it's the only thing you have. It takes paramount importance.
right. Because you have
Yeah.
you have two groups of people, as specifically on Twitter. It seems like you have two groups of people uh, who treat Twitter like it's life or death, and essentially treat it like it is their workplace. And one group of them are the people who, for whom that is actually true. They have a media job that has some sort of social media component to it, and of course, they probably spend more time on there than they're required to by their bosses. But in their head, this is what they have to do for their jobs. The other people are people who have so much invested of themselves psychically in their political identity that is formed through online discourse that it is essentially their workplace in terms of like their actual work. If they have a job, and a lot of them don't, if they have a job, that is an alienated space where they don't feel like they feel like they're fully being instrumentalized, and it's dead time for them. Being online is where they get to be political, and so it's as much of a place for like finding self identity through like creative work as a fulfilling job would be, even though it's entirely illusory. And that kind of environment is going to raise the stakes over time, like within the person and over time, because it just has to be what it can ever be. It has to be a place where people can find something that's just it's not possible to discover there. And so it gets more fraught, and the need to cancel people and which is I see is universal. And any clique, regardless of what their ideological formation is, those internal regimentations exist because that's how you maintain order. That's how you know who the good guys and the bad guys are. And it's inevitable and necessary because in the minds of all the people on here, the stakes are so high. This is the political ground. This is the battleground of ideas. This is where the future is being determined. Of course, all weapons are to be at your disposal in that case. Of course, opinions are worth someone being canceled or fired for. It's all we have. Like, how could you possibly say it's just what they said or just their opinion? That's the sum total of their identity.
Well, yeah, and I think going back to the good guys and bad guys thing, because people form an insular, you know, clique on the internet, and they find, you know, you immediately find people that remind you of yourself, or, you know, that you want to remind you of yourself, um, and so you form your own little like community, and when who are you? You're the good guys. Well, who are the bad guys if you're not actually around any bad guys?
Yeah.
Like if you are only around your friends, then and you someone has to go. We have to be fighting someone. But also the only people I see are the people in my group. So I guess I'll go after them.
Yeah.
Because that's what they think sort of politics is sort of purifying ranks, and a lot of it is also, I think, influenced by the idea of prefigurative politics, where it's like, well, we have to have this group of people that are, you know, you can't do good politics without having good politics, which historically is not true at all. You get good politics by participating in projects that have a good political basis. And then while doing them, you figure out, oh, the reason I'm fighting for, you know, say, healthcare is because everyone deserves it. The reason I'm fighting for it for me is because everyone deserves it, because it's a universal thing. And also people deserve all of these other things. And also look at all of these things that these people have and all of the wealth in our country. And like, it just develops out there. You start thinking about things by doing things. And I think people don't get that. I remember I wrote about this. There was a girl who said, she said, well, like, what do I do if like a Pepe wants to join my union? And I was like, then you won. What are you talking about? Like, it's a union. It's not a social club. It's not a group of like-minded people. It's a group of people with, it's a perfect institution when it operates well, because it is the only thing that forces people to form a collective self-interest, which transcends beliefs, ideology, anything. And then if you're good at it, like, the beliefs and ideology form themselves around that collective self-interest.
Yeah, but I think the reason that's possible, the reason that like the Pepe and the union thing is so terrifying to someone who has a internet that's internet-based politics, because like we're saying, all politics is just the accumulation of your posts. That means that every post has to have it be freighted with meaning, because that's your political action is posting. So that means the opinions you put online are meaningful. They have like this weight to them. Whereas if you are politically active in the real world, this is a real distinction. You do fewer things about politics, right? Like, you're not posting 2,500 times a day, but you are, say, going to a union meeting every week, or you're going to a study meeting, or you're going to a picket line or a demonstration. That cumulatively, that's many fewer acts, but they are more psychically and emotionally and politically satisfying, because they actually involve doing something. They don't have to be. There doesn't have to be this accumulation of absolutely weightless posts that together are supposed to form a political identity. So that is one reason that it's insidious to find the internet to be the place where you're doing your political formation, because you end up putting all of life or death on all of these things that in a real world situation would essentially never even come up, because there would be practical concerns to deal with. But there is no practical anything on the internet. It's all theoretical. It's all hypothetical, and it's all in a frictionless plane of putting together a perfect theory rather than finding what works through action. And the other thing that I think is absolutely like built into the source code of online discourse that makes it just impossible to build positively from is when we're talking about the need to have an in-group and an out-group, and a need to like find traitors within to purify and also to show your own virtue. The real problem with that is yes, obviously it creates a paranoid atmosphere, creates a lack of solidarity, the opposite of solidarity. But what it also does is it trains your argumentation. It trains your way of talking about politics to be about appealing to a group point of view. Like, if you're in an argument with somebody, the way you win is by saying this person is not, this person's point of view is not in alignment with our values, whatever your subgroup thinks that means. But that means that it is impossible to have any kind of engagement. I'm not talking about like debating, just literally addressing arguments by the other side, because your only mode of argument is by appealing to a group consensus that they're not part of. And more importantly, a third person watching you who's not politically invested in either side is not part of. And so pointing that out to them and saying, like, this person has violated X, Y, or Z, if X, Y, or Z are not part of what they care about, they're not going to give a shit. And that goes for like your political opponents, but it more importantly goes for a person who's just trying to figure out what they even believe in. And they see you appealing to this group consensus that they have not bought into because they have not been part of your group. That means it's almost that you have created a argumentative and rhetorical strategy and mindset that is actually unintelligible to people outside of the group. Because at the end of the day, you will always reach for the easy option of censorship and excommunication. And it's like, I mean, just from a raw rise to power, will to power perspective, that can work in an in-group, but it by definition won't work with people who aren't part of that group because they don't care if they're kicked out. They're not in.
Yeah. And also, it makes you look insane.
Yeah.
Like, there has to be something like a word for leftists. I mean, I usually say it about liberals, but they become these people who don't think that anything the right ever says about them is true. Like, they would never consider that. That's anathema to them. And it's like, you don't want to be in that position, because all that means is that when they make a point that is true, you double down on that behavior, whether it is good or whether it is bad. And it's essentially forming a political identity in negation, which doesn't make any sense anyway, because like all of these things are kind of moving targets, and what people say about you is, kind of, it's going to change. I'm not really sure. I'm not really sure. Most people who are online or politically online really have any politics that exist outside of their opposition to someone else at this point. It's all because, again, it's an attempt at sociality. Um, they understand, I think, on base levels that like maybe there are sort of injustices, or if they're right wing, they understand that their life is shitty. If they're like the new conservative, Pepe things that are like, in the post-war period, I probably would have had a job and a wife and maybe even a house, and they understand that things are shitty. I'm not sure if they know what the sort of politics for them is an identity. It's not a means to an end. It's not like a worldview. It's not like they're like, this is how the world works, and I think this is how the world should work, and this is how I think we get there. It's more of a, there are these bad people, and my job is to defeat them, and that generally amounts to posting.